So you want to get started with a handmade business. Perfect. Let's talk about all of the benefits and the challenges of owning your own handmade goods business. Hi, I'm Steph. I'm the owner of Bushyl. I make soap, candles, lip balms, all kinds of bath, body, and home goods. I started my business about a year and a half ago, and on this channel, I try and do as much behind the scenes stuff as I can. Whether you're interested in starting your own business in a similar area, or you just like watching people run their businesses. Whatever you're here for, I'm happy that you're watching. But today I thought it would be kind of fun to give my perspective on some of the benefits and challenges of having a handmade goods business. Basically, I'm making a video that I think I would have liked to watch before I started my business. I think that there's all of the sort of surface level knowledge you can have about different businesses to start on your own as a solopreneur. But I'm hoping today I can discuss a little bit more of the lifestyle around a handmade goods business and whether that may or may not be the right kind of fit for you. First, I'm going to start with the benefits. Start this off on a positive note. Obviously, I continue to run this business, so I enjoy it. And to me, the pros outweigh the cons. We'll get to the challenges and we'll talk a little bit more about maybe stuff that I wish I would have known in terms of weighing whether or not this is the right type of business for me to start. The first benefit is pretty obvious. I think it's why anyone really starts a handmade business, is that you are creating work around something that you enjoy doing. Usually people create a handmade product for the first time as a creative experience or as a hobby. Maybe they've been doing it for years and it's something that you genuinely enjoy. And that's what leads you to think, like, I could maybe make a business out of this. This continues to be a pro for me. I will say that, like, some of the shine of making soap or candles has worn off in terms of, like, it's not quite as exciting as it was when I was like figuring things out. But I still really love having the finished product of the things that I make. Like, it is still so satisfying for me to like cut into a loaf of soap and put the bars on a curing rack. Like, the satisfaction that I get from making things, that's still there. And I still really love having like a physical thing that comes from the work that I do. In other service-based work that I've done where, you know, you're offering your skill set but not necessarily like a tangible product, I think there's a little bit less satisfaction once everything's done. And again, this is something that might be good for you to ask yourself and for your personality, because I'm sure there are other people who don't feel that way. Maybe they're the opposite, depending on like the scale of the skill set and like the service that they're offering. But for me, I felt like it's certainly less satisfying in that way of like handing over a physical good to somebody. Another great thing about a handmade goods business, and this is also true for someone who's offering a service-based type thing in some cases, is that you can usually start working from home unless you need some sort of like massive piece of equipment to make whatever it is you're making. You're probably already making the products that you're thinking of turning into a business, which means you're probably doing it from home already. I don't know many people who have like a hobby art studio that they spend money on. I mean, good for you if you do. That sounds amazing. But for the rest of us, like for me, I started, the first time I made soap was at home. I continued to make soap and candles and lip balm and shower steamers here in my home before I eventually got an additional space. And that is so great because you're not adding overhead right away to your business. You can test out whether this business will be a success or not before you make any big commitments with a space. You know, if you wanted to open a restaurant, there's not really much you can do about the upfront capital you need to get a space for that. You cannot run a restaurant out of your home. And so a handmade goods business is great for that because, like I said, you're probably already working from home, making these things as you sort of test out products. Another really great thing about handmade goods is the flexible hours. Again, there's some things, maybe if you're a virtual assistant or a social media manager, some of that is flexible as well. But again, if you open a restaurant, there's not much flexibility in those hours, that's for sure. Even if you wanted to do landscaping, like you can't work at 2 in the morning on landscaping. There's very much like clear dedicated hours for those services, and a lot of client interactions need to happen during business hours. But if you are selling products through an Etsy store, you can make your inventory whatever time of day you want to. If you're a night owl, if you get your best work done at 10 p.m., that's great. You can do that, and it will not affect your business as long as you're working with whatever demand you have for your product. This is slightly different if you start doing markets. Obviously, markets happen during the day, but again, those are all elective. Like, you don't have to do markets to run a handmade goods business. It might just be something that helps. But there's truly so much flexibility when it comes to making inventory that you can do it whenever suits your schedule, which is great if you have to start your business while you're already working somewhere else. It's just really easy to sort of like, you don't have to meet up with clients over coffee when you're supposed to be in the middle of your workday. Like, none of that is an issue when it's handmade goods. Now, this next one is certainly specific to me, and I think it applies to a lot of handmade goods. It's not true for all of them. You know, if you are painting like large canvases, or maybe you are making quilts, and those items require a higher price point for it to be worth your time. But for me, I was making items that could have a pretty low price point. There's a lot less selling you have to do when your product is like the price of a cup of coffee. And by selling, I mean like the conversations around getting someone to purchase. Obviously, you have to sell more products to make the same as someone who's charging $500 for one painting. I have to sell a lot of bars of soap to equal $500. But in terms of gaining new prospective customers, fans of the product, that happens pretty easily at a market or something like that, because my low price point items allow people to make that purchase without too much thinking about it. You know, you don't have to convince yourself much to spend $5 on a lip balm tin. And I think that for me is nice because I'm not spending as much time pitching myself and convincing people to work with me. When I was a wedding planner, the lowest price point service that I had was a day of event coordinator, and it was like $1,500. And if someone's never met me before and I'm just starting out, I mean, I guess I didn't charge $1,500 when I was just starting out, but I was still charging like $1,000 or maybe a little less. That's a lot of money, especially for someone who's planning a wedding. They're already spending a ton of money. You have to really work on your sales technique to convince people to purchase with you when you're doing something like that. Whereas when someone comes up to my table and they're smelling soaps or candles or whatever, I'm not really talking much. Like, they're picking up and buying a product based on how it smells. They might ask a few questions, but I don't feel like I'm convincing people to have trust in me. It's much easier on that level. And then what that means is that you can amass more people who have sort of tried your brand for the first time or your products for the first time, without as much effort of like convincing them that you're worth it. So if someone buys a lip balm from me, not only did I not have to spend a ton of time convincing them to spend $5, it's possible that just from them trying that one small price point item, they maybe always come back to me for lip balms when they come to markets that I'm at, or they start trying other products of mine because they were so satisfied with the quality of that product. And again, like, the marketing effort is so much lower when somebody's buying something from you without much hesitation. And one of the last things that I like about handmade goods is that I think that a lot of the marketing benefits in terms of what you're telling people to like about your product is sort of built into the fact that it's handmade. When people hear that something is handmade, they already are associating a list of qualities with that product that you don't even have to lay out for them. I mean, you still can, like, put it on your website or whatever, but what people love about handmade products is that they either have met the person who made it because they came to a market and talked to you, or they can see on your website who you are. Like, it's very clear the separation between the product and the person who made it is like nothing, you know? It's 1 degree of separation from the person who owns the company. I think there's a reverence for that in this day and age, that people are already on board with the vibe of what you make just from hearing it's handmade. And if there's someone who really appreciates handmade products, you're not convincing them of the value of it being handmade. Like, there are some people who will see your price point and think like, "Oh, well, I can get a knit sweater from Target for however much." And it's like, "Well, yeah, then go to Target." But I think most people who are seeking out handmade products understand that there's going to be a higher price point than the drugstore equivalent of whatever you make. Like, yeah, you can get a Dove bar of soap for, I don't even know how much, but I'm sure significantly less than what I sell my soap for. But people who are seeking me out, I'm not convincing them why they need to spend more money than they would on Dove. Like, they get it already. So I think as long as you're putting yourself out there and sharing images or getting in front of people, allowing them to see your product, sensory experience of what you make, whether that's what they see or for me is smell, that sort of thing, that's really what they need to make a decision to buy or not. And you don't have to put as much effort into explaining like why this is the way to go. Okay, so now the less fun things to talk about, but in some ways more important, and that is all of the challenges of having a handmade goods business. And I'm gonna start with the hardest ones up front. The first one being all of the fixed costs of making a product. And this certainly varies from product to product. There are a lot of people who use upcycled fabric, or maybe for jewelry, they're using materials that are upcycled, or if you are into ceramics, you're spending money on clay and glaze, and I don't do ceramics, but I think that pretty much covers that. But whatever product you're making, you're going to have to spend money on supplies. And depending on what those fixed costs of your supplies are, you're spending money pretty frequently. So as you run out of materials, you're sort of always spending more money. When I was a wedding planner, I had hardly any fixed costs. It was like the subscription for my website was the main one. And then everything else was sort of icing on the cake. Now, we had fewer purchases from us because obviously, like, again, you're convincing people to book you. So you're spending a lot more time and effort into the sale of each one of those clients. But once you had the sale, like, that was mostly profit. And I think that's why a lot of people start with service-based businesses, or why they're interested in service-based businesses, because the startup costs are much lower. Maybe you just like need headshots or, a website, logo design, that kind of thing. But with a product-based business, you need supplies for whatever it is you make. If you're knitting scarves, you're obviously going to need yarn, and like you are going to continue having to purchase yarn no matter how long you have the business. There's also sometimes startup equipment costs. I mentioned ceramics. You're going to need either your own kiln or access to a kiln. And so that's a big thing too. And I think that stops a lot of people from going from hobby to business, because the quantities that you need to buy to have enough inventory for like a market of some kind might just be too cost prohibitive for people, which is unfortunate, but absolutely understandable. And then the second one kind of ties into that, which is that it takes a while to become profitable, because you are always buying more supplies. And if you're growing steadily, your profits from previous sales are just going to more supplies because you need larger quantities than you had previously purchased. And so that point of profitability, unless there's a huge margin on the product you make, which if there is, congrats, stick with that. But if there's not, you're not going to be profitable for a while. And maybe you're profitable a little bit. It's tough to get to a point where you're making enough income in profit only to support a living. If you're starting this while you're working somewhere else, it's going to take you a while before you could quit your job and do this full time. Unless, of course, you have a runaway hit, which is great. But if I'm being realistic, I wish that I had gone into this business with the mindset that it was not going to make me any money for at least 5 years. Like if I really felt like I'm not going to pay myself for 5 years, I think that would have been a much healthier approach to the start of this business. And I don't know when I'll start paying myself, but I certainly am not right now. When you potentially need to start hiring people, but you're not even paying yourself yet, it just becomes this like big thing that you have to consider. For me, at least, there is a really tough balance between growing and achieving profitability. And right now it feels like the only way to be more profitable is to work myself around the clock. And I just don't have the energy to do that. I don't have another job, except I have 2 kids, which in terms of like my bandwidth to commit to a business is kind of the same thing. So definitely something to keep in mind. Like, is this something that you enjoy doing that you might wait 5 years or more before you can leave another job in order to pursue it full time? And the third one is definitely not something I thought about. I am an introvert. I've mentioned that before. Again, people are usually shocked by that. I think it's because I talk a lot, but you can still be an introvert. I need alone time so much. I want to be alone as often as I want to be around people, if not more. And I thought the great thing about having my own business was that I would have so much alone time. I could just watch my shows, get some work done, and go to a coffee shop if I needed to be around people. Like, it sounds like a dream to me. And mostly that's true. I do like the fact that, like, if I just want to spend the day alone, that's very accessible to me. But I also feel like my first year in business, I felt so lonely at the end of it. And going into like the start of my second year, when I moved into a new space with someone else, like it's a shared studio. There's like a door that we can close. Like if I'm making soap, I shut the door. But otherwise we like leave it open. She's a very good friend of mine. So we sort of started off with that relationship. But even just that little bit, like we're not talking to each other all day, but it's just enough regular human interaction that I don't feel so lonely. I also meet once or twice a month with a few other friends who also own their own businesses. And that is so nice. It is so nice to like talk about the business and bounce ideas off of someone and not feel sort of so isolated in these decisions. So I would absolutely suggest having those sorts of things in place before doing this full time. If you're starting your handmade business while also having like a full-time job where you go to an office every day, this does not apply to you. You probably have enough time with people anyway. But if your day job, or whatever you want to call it, is also working from home alone, and then you want to add this sort of isolated business on top of that, I just think it's something to consider. Find a way to maybe meet up with other business owners in your area, or even just friends, like just work some socializing into your week so that you don't feel like you're just spending every day alone in your head trying to navigate this new adventure. This next one is sort of goes back to when I was talking about the benefits of starting a business doing something you really enjoy. I would say that this is the other side of that coin, which is once you've mastered your craft, there is a sense of monotony that can sort of creep in terms of doing the same thing over and over again. Normally, if you're starting a handmade business, in my experience, you're someone who loves creative expression. I think I'm not sure what you could make that doesn't make you feel creative in some way. And if that's what drew you to this process to begin with, then you might feel at some point like you are lacking that creative expression because you're just continuing to make the same things over and over again. And I don't think that this is something that will ruin the experience for you. I just think it's a really good thing to have in mind so that you don't lose the fun of the creativity. For me, the thing that challenges that and allows me to not feel that way is I do seasonal collections. So I'm always coming up with new fragrances, new label designs. I'm introducing new products. So that's sort of the same thing. I get to feel creative for the things that are new about the business while also relying on the parts of the business that I've mastered that don't have so many like variables to them. And then this last one this isn't a right off the bat problem, at least not, I don't think, for most people, but it's something I'm struggling with right now. And I just want it to be something that's on your radar if you're starting a business and thinking through like, what is the 5-year plan for this business? What's the 10-year plan for this business? And that is hiring employees, or in some capacity, having someone else make the products that you make. So certainly when you start your handmade goods business, you're the person hand making everything. And so you feel very close to that product. And when you are selling to people or talking to stores, like, you get to say, yes, I make everything. And there is certainly a positive reaction that I get from people when I say, yep, I make it all myself. And when I get to a point where that's not something that I can say, I am nervous about what does it look like for someone else to be making some of these products. Like, how do I make sure the quality stays to the level that I want it to be at? How do I train someone to make all of my products? Like, a lot of stuff that I do is not written down. Like, some of my stuff, yes, it's a recipe, but it's like, oh, well, this is how you do it because this is how I always do it. It's like, I can't necessarily describe it. And so the thought of like training someone else to replicate the exact product that I'm making is incredibly intimidating. But I also know that it's going to be required at some point if I want to continue to grow. Now, maybe you don't want to grow beyond what you can make, and that's totally fine, especially if you are able to live off of the income or like get whatever income you need from the business. Maybe this is always just going to be supplemental income to you because your partner makes enough money, whatever your relationship to the money your business brings in, that's your business. But if you're getting to a point where you want to keep growing and seeing how far you can make it and how big this can get, you'll have to hire people. It's just like really hard to do everything yourself. I think what's helpful in terms of knowing that before you get started is keeping that in mind as you create recipes, as you're documenting how you make things. Like, keep notes about what order you do things in and what are the small tasks that happen at different times. Like, besides making the actual product, like let's say candles, for example, obviously there's making candles, but aside from that, there's, for me, cutting my wicks. There's cleanup for me. God bless you if you don't have cleanup as part of your handmade business, but for me, it's a big part. There's ordering supplies, like tracking supplies, all of that sort of stuff. Some of this stuff you can do through software, but you might eventually have an employee that does that for you. There's customer service. There's all kinds of stuff that's not necessarily just making the products. And so if you're always going about the business tasks with the mindset of how could someone take this over for me, I think you'll be much better off when it comes time to hire someone, because you'll have this hopefully like actual list. I take real notes about what somebody could do for you. To me, that's a more successful way to start off this journey of a handmade goods business. So those are the main benefits and challenges that I see with running a handmade goods business. I really enjoy what this business has brought into my life, but I want to be honest, about all of the difficulties of this as well. I hope that this was helpful. If you are thinking about starting your own handmade business, please let me know in the comments below what you're thinking of making. If you have any questions that I can help with, I'd love to hear that. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to subscribe so that you get notified the next time I make a video.